The silence was the first sign that everything had gone to hell. Not the quiet of a sleeping town, but the profound, unnatural stillness of a held breath. We rolled into Greenbrier, West Virginia, with rifles up and senses screaming. Task Force Silver Crescent, 4 government spooks in an armored SUV, sent to contain a panic that wasn't there. The town square was a tableau from a nightmare's cutting room floor. A Ford sat idling by the curb, its driver's side door hanging open, the radio murmuring a forgotten country song. On a park bench, a child's toy truck lay on its side, one wheel still spinning lazily in the Appalachian breeze. We moved from building to building, a 4-person ghost story. Inside the diner, half-eaten plates of eggs and bacon cooled on the tables. Coffee pots were still warm. The place should have been bustling with the morning rush. Instead, it was a museum of interrupted lives. No bodies, no blood, no sign of struggle. Just gone. It was a mass vanishing clean and absolute and 1,000 times more terrifying than the massacre we'd been prepped for. Anything, Lucas? I kept my voice low, a habit from a dozen other hellholes that felt a world away from this. Lucas, our tech savant, was already setting up his gear. A tripod unfolded with a series of soft clicks, a polished dish on top, slowly rotating. He tapped at the screen of a ruggedized tablet, his brow furrowed. "It's wrong, Ethan?" "All wrong." He pointed to a jagged waveform spiking on the display. "There's a residual infrasonic field. Faint, but it's imprinted on the area. And the EM spectrum is a mess of ghost signals. It's like the air itself remembers a scream, and it's playing it back on a loop we can't hear." I looked over at Nathan Blackburn. He stood in the center of the town square, his eyes closed, his posture as still as the statues in a graveyard. Nathan was our tracker, but what he tracked wasn't footprints. He read the echoes left on the world, the emotional stains that violence and terror leave behind. He knelt, pressing the palm of his hand flat against the cracked asphalt as if taking the town's pulse. His raven black hair hung over his face, hiding his expression. We gave him space. What he did was older than our science, and it required a reverence we'd all learned to respect. After a long moment, he drew a shaky breath and stood up, his dark eyes unfocused. "Primal," he whispered, his voice raspy. "I see the fear, the kind that liquefies your bones. But it's twisted." He shook his head, struggling for the words. At the end, the fear turned into something else. Awe. A kind of rapturous, predatory reverence. He finally met my gaze, and the look in his eyes chilled me more than the empty town. "They weren't running away, Ethan. They were walking towards it." His words hung in the dead air, pointing us toward the one place we hadn't checked, the old lumber mill at the edge of town, the epicenter of the energy Lucas had detected. We found the gate unlocked, the main cutting floor eerily silent, save for the drip of water from the rafters. And there, in the center of the vast wooden floor, was the source. A massive symbol had been burned into the planks, a spiral not of lines, but of wolf tracks, dozens of them, all converging on a single point in the middle. The scorch marks were deep, radiating a faint, palpable heat. This was Cassidy's domain. She stepped forward, her small frame belying the power she commanded. "Give me a perimeter," she ordered, her voice tight. "Don't let anything cross the threshold." Cassidy Morgan, our resident occultist, pulled a small leather pouch from her belt. She mixed a pinch of gleaming silver dust with a drop of her own blood, pricked from her thumb with a small obsidian knife. Her hands moved in the air, tracing runes that seemed to hang for a moment like smoke before dissipating. as she chanted in a language that felt like grinding stones. The silver and blood mixture in her palm began to glow. With a final, sharp syllable, she cast the concoction onto the symbol on the floor. The spiral of wolf tracks erupted in a flash of ghostly silver light. The air pressure dropped, and I felt a wave of vertigo wash over me. Cass staggered back, one hand pressed to her temple, a pained gasp escaping her lips. "This isn't a summons," she wheezed, her face pale. "It's an anchor. Something ancient and hungry. It's using this place to warp the physical laws. This isn't just magic. It's rewriting reality." The light faded, leaving behind the smell of burnt ozone and something else, something metallic and old. While Cass recovered, I took a team to the mill's administrative office. It was as untouched as the rest of the town, save for one detail: a heavy-duty floor safe tucked into the corner, its dial clean of dust. "Lucas, you're up," I said. He made short work of it, his fingers flying over a device that mimicked thousands of combinations per second. With a heavy thunk, the lock disengaged. Inside, nestled amongst property deeds and payroll ledgers, was something that didn't belong. A ship's log, its leather cover cracked and stiff with age. I carefully opened it. The ink was faded, the script in elegant 18th century cursive. It detailed the voyage of the sea serpent from the old world to the colonies. The entries grew more frantic, describing a sickness, a madness, that claimed the crew one by one until only the captain remained. He wrote of a single passenger, kept chained in the hold, a man named Ryden. The final entry, scrawled with a trembling hand, filled the last page. He is the only one left. The others, they begged him for the bite. I hear him laughing below deck. His hunger will change this land. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a new phenomenon. It was an old plague, one that had been sleeping for centuries. As I closed the book, my comm unit crackled to life. It was command. "Silver Crescent, report." The voice of our handler, General Matthews, was as sterile as a surgeon's scalpel. "Sir, we have a possible patient 0, I said, my voice tight. "Name's Ryden. Looks like we're dealing with a unique strain of lycanthropy. The entire town is gone." There was a pause. "Forget Greenbrier," Matthews said. His tone clipped. "Satellite imagery just picked up a duplicate energy signature. Industrial freight tunnels beneath Chicago. The hunt is on, Carter. Go." The descent felt like being swallowed. We left the Chicago skyline behind, trading the hum of the living city for the dead, oppressive silence of its underbelly. The entrance was a rusted freight elevator in a derelict warehouse, its cage groaning in protest as it lowered us into the dark. The air that rose to meet us was thick and foul, a cocktail of decay. The plan mentioned ozone, but this was worse. It was a layered stench. The damp, mineral smell of century-old concrete, the fuzzy scent of black mold, and underneath it all, a cloyingly sweet odor like meat left too long in the sun. This was a place where things came to rot. The freight tunnels were a relic of a bygone era, a private subway system built for moving goods, now abandoned to time and darkness. Our flashlight beams cut sharp cones through the gloom, revealing narrow-gauge tracks that vanished into an endless labyrinth. The walls were slick with moisture and covered in graffiti. But it wasn't the work of street gangs. These were symbols, painted in what looked disturbingly like dried blood. A stylized wolf jaw, open and devouring a fractured spiral. "The first hunger," Nathan said, his voice a low murmur that barely disturbed the quiet. He ran a gloved finger over one of the symbols. "These are based on old tribal markings. Potawatomi Illiniwek. but they've been twisted. The lines are wrong. All the symbols for protection, for balance, they've been inverted, corrupted, filled with pain. He looked down the tunnel, his gaze distant. They're not just marking territory. They're desecrating it. We were maybe half a mile in when Lucas stopped dead, holding up a fist. "Movement," he whispered, pointing to his tablet. "Multiple hostiles. 200 feet ahead, around that bend." I signaled for a tactical formation, my hand tightening on the haft of my custom-forged axe. We moved like wraiths, our boots making no sound on the gravel between the rails. As we rounded the curve, the source of the sweet smell became horribly apparent. It was a lair. The tunnel widened into a larger junction, and it was filled with them. The cult's new recruits, the Omegas as the files called them. These weren't the proud werewolves of myth. They were abominations, the failures whose minds had shattered during the change. They scuttled on all fours, their limbs elongated to unnatural lengths, their spines bent at impossible angles. Their skin was pallid and hairless, stretched tight over knotted muscle. Their eyes, clustered in the dark, glowed with a feral, mindless hunger. They weren't howling. They were making a series of wet, clicking, chittering sounds like a nest of immense insects. One of them spotted us. Its head snapped in our direction, and it let out a high-pitched shriek that echoed down the concrete tube. Then they charged. The next few minutes were a blur of tactical hell. The narrow corridor turned into a meat grinder. I was in the front, my axe a blur of motion. It wasn't about killing blows. It was about disabling them. I swung low, cleaving through a creature's leg, sending it tumbling into its brethren. Another leaped from the wall, and I met its charge with the flat of the axe, crushing its skull with a sickening crunch. To my right, Lucas tossed a UV grenade. It erupted in a silent flash of violent purple light, and the Omegas shrieked, shielding their burning eyes, their skin blistering where the light touched it. From the rear, Nathan was a silent death. His bow, a modern composite design, sent arrow after arrow into the fray. The tips were forged from meteoric iron, one of the few things besides silver that could reliably punch through their mutated hides. I saw one arrow strike an Omega in the chest, and the creature simply dissolved into a cloud of black ash. They were relentless, crawling over their own wounded to get to us. "Cass, now!" I yelled over the din. Cassidy was already chanting, her hands weaving intricate patterns in the air. A wall of shimmering, glyph-covered light erupted in front of us, forming a semicircle that held the tide of creatures at bay. They slammed against it, clawing and snapping, but the barrier held. Her face was a mask of concentration, sweat beading on her brow. As she spoke a particularly complex phrase, I saw her eyes go vacant for a split second, a flicker of confusion. "The name of my first mentor," she murmured, so low I almost didn't hear it. The barrier flickered but held firm. The magic was costing her, chipping away at her memories piece by piece. "Lucas, the door!" I shouted, pointing toward a massive steel bulkhead set into the tunnel wall. The energy readings were pouring from behind it. It was an old bank vault, probably used to move cash in the city's early days. "On it!" He knelt, plugging a bypass device into the rusted control panel. The Omegas redoubled their assault on Cass's shield. Sparks flew. The tumblers inside the massive door groaned and clicked. With a final, ear-splitting screech of metal, the vault door swung inward. The moment it opened, Lucas's tablet screamed a proximity alert. Inside, resting on a simple stone pedestal in the center of the dust-choked chamber, was a shard of polished black obsidian, It was the size of a human heart, and suspended deep within its glassy depths was a swirling miniature nebula of purple and silver light. It pulsed with a cold, silent energy. I didn't hesitate. I pushed past Lucas, dashed into the vault, and scooped the artifact off the pedestal. The second my fingers closed around its impossibly smooth surface, every single Omega outside let out a synchronized, soul-shattering howl. It wasn't a cry of aggression, but of pure, unadulterated agony. Then, silence. We looked back through the shimmering barrier. Every one of them had collapsed, their bodies rapidly decaying into piles of fine gray dust. The immediate threat was gone. My heart was still hammering against my ribs. As my breathing steadied, my flashlight beam fell upon the back wall of the vault. Scrawled in fresh, dark blood was a single message, a destination: New Orleans. Ryden wasn't hiding. He was leading us on a leash. This was a game to him, and we were just the pieces on his board. New Orleans hit us like a physical blow. The air was a wet, heavy blanket you had to chew through, thick with the smells of magnolia, river water, and decay. It was a city that wore its mystique like a shroud, where the veil between worlds felt thin and frayed. Our target wasn't some back-alley cultist. He was local royalty. Randall Dupree, an eccentric millionaire with a penchant for the macabre, lived in a sprawling Garden District mansion that looked like it had been carved from bone and shadows. We didn't storm the gates. A formal request was sent. To our surprise, it was granted. Dupree met us at the door himself. He was an older man, impeccably dressed in a white linen suit, with a mane of silver hair and eyes as cold and gray as a winter sky. He leaned on a cane topped with a silver serpent. "Task Force Silver Crescent," he said, his voice a smooth, southern drawl that held no warmth. "I've been expecting you. Please come in. Do try not to track your government sensibilities all over my Kerman carpets." The moment I stepped inside, the hairs on my arms stood up. This wasn't a house. It was a fortress of magical wards. I saw faint lines of red brick dust and salt tracing the doorways, a classic hoodoo defense. The air itself was heavy, pressing in on us, crackling with contained power. Lucas's tablet was going haywire, the screen a blizzard of competing energy signatures. Cass flinched, pressing a hand to her temple. "Feeling that, are we, my dear?" Dupree said with a thin smile directed at her. "A little something I picked up in Port-au-Prince. The air itself has teeth here." He led us on a tour, not of art or antiques, but of curses. It was a private museum of damnation. He showed us a display case of haunted dolls with stitched-shut mouths, their button eyes seeming to follow us. He pointed out a set of Aztec sacrificial knives that he claimed still whispered at night. He gestured to a clouded mirror from the Lalaurie mansion. "It shows you not your reflection," he explained calmly, "but the face of your own death." Finally, he led us into a vast, two-story library. In the center of the room, on a velvet pedestal under a single spotlight, sat the second fragment of the heart of the sleeping sky. This piece was different from the first. It was a chunk of meteorite, polished to a mirror sheen, and it pulsed with a faint, cold blue light that seemed to drink the warmth from the room. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Dupree said almost lovingly. "The perfect symmetry of cosmic oblivion and earthly power." He turned to us, his smile vanishing. "It is mine, and you will not be taking it." "Dupree, you don't understand what you have," I said, stepping forward. "That thing is a part of a key. The man who wants it back is a monster who wiped a town off the map." He laughed, a dry, rattling sound. Oh, I understand perfectly, Mr. Carter. You see a weapon, a threat to be neutralized. I see a masterpiece, the ultimate expression of entropy, the sublime and eternal beauty of death itself. Why would I surrender such a thing to you government dogs, who would only lock it away in a concrete box? Cassidy tried a different approach. The power you're keeping here is unbalanced, she said, her voice steady despite the pressure in the room. It's a beacon. It draws things to it. You're putting this entire city at risk. My dear, my protections are woven from blood and bargains with powers far older than your little organization, Dupree countered, tapping his serpent-headed cane on the polished floor. The Loa themselves watch over this house. I am quite safe. His words were cut short by a sound from outside, a low, mournful howl that rose in pitch and was answered by another, and another until the humid night air was filled with a chorus of lupine hunger. My blood went cold. They'd found us. I moved to the window, peering through the heavy velvet curtains. The grounds were swarming with them. Not the mindless Omegas from Chicago, but larger, more intelligent shapes. Werewolves, dozens of them, their eyes glowing like malevolent embers in the dark. They were surrounding the mansion, a tightening noose of tooth and claw. Dupree stood beside me, his expression shifting from arrogance to cold fury. He looked at the encroaching pack, then back at me. A thin, predatory smile touched his lips. "Well, now," he murmured, his hand twisting the head of his cane. With a soft shick, he drew a long, wickedly thin stiletto from its shaft. "It appears we have a mutual pest control problem, Mr. Carter." He gestured with the blade toward the windows. "My home does not appreciate uninvited guests. Not the living, and certainly not the undead." The first window on the ground floor shattered inwards, spraying glass across a priceless rug. The siege had begun. We were trapped. Not with an enemy, but between two warring factions of the night, caught in the crossfire of a battle between two different kinds of darkness. The mansion became a symphony of chaos. We were fighting a war on three fronts. Outside, the steady, disciplined assault of Ryden's pack. Inside, the house itself fought back. And in the middle was Silver Crescent, trying desperately not to be devoured by either. The curses Dupree had collected were now his guard dogs. Shadows detached from the walls, coalescing into humanoid shapes with long, sharp knives, their movements silent and jerky. They swiped at werewolves foolish enough to burst through a window, their ethereal blades passing harmlessly through the beasts, but severing their connection to the physical world, causing them to dissolve into screaming dust. From the upper floors came the sound of weeping. Spectral women whose sobs induced a creeping madness in anyone who listened too long. I saw a massive, grizzled werewolf clutch its head and start clawing at its own eyes before one of Nathan's arrows silenced it. Thorny vines, thick as my arm, erupted from the wallpaper, wrapping around the limbs of intruders and squeezing until bones snapped. It was a beautiful, deadly nightmare, and we were trapped in its heart. "Lucas, find us a dead zone!" I yelled over the cacophony. "Working on it!" He fumbled with a device on his wrist, a high-frequency emitter. He activated it, and a 30-foot radius around us went quiet. The oppressive, magical energy receded, the whispers faded. The attacking vines withered and fell away. It's a temporary counter-frequency. It disrupts localized thaumaturgical fields, but it's drawing a lot of power. We use these fleeting pockets of safety to fight back. From the relative calm of Lucas's bubble, Nathan picked off werewolves with deadly accuracy. I stood at the edge, my axe a grim pendulum, meeting the charge of any beast that got too close to our fragile sanctuary. Suddenly, a new presence entered the fray. A werewolf larger than the others, its fur the color of ash, moved with a shaman's grace. It ignored the physical combat, its eyes fixed on Cassidy. It began to chant, its voice a low growl that resonated with dark power. "He's one of Raiden's lieutenants," Cass grunted, her own hands already moving. "A bone singer." The two of them engaged in a duel of pure will. The shaman slammed a gnarled fist on the floor, and the floorboards beneath Cass turned to quicksand. She countered with a gesture, and the wood solidified, sending a shockwave that threw the shaman back. He snarled and hurled a bolt of green, sickly energy at her. Cass threw up a shield of shimmering silver, the curse shattering against it like glass. The very foundations of the mansion groaned under the strain of their battle. That's when the entire west wall of the library exploded inwards. Dust and splintered wood filled the air. Through the newly made hole stepped a figure that dwarfed all the others. 9 feet tall, impossibly broad, with fur as black as a starless night and eyes that burned with cold, ancient intelligence. Raiden. He didn't even glance at us. His burning gaze was fixed on only one man. "Randall," Raiden's voice was the grinding of tectonic plates. "You have kept what is mine for far too long." Dupree, for the first time, looked afraid. But he didn't run. He raised his stiletto, his face a mask of defiant pride. It belongs to beauty, not to savagery. The fight was brutally short. Dupree was fast, his blade darting like a snake, but Raiden was a force of nature. He swatted the stiletto aside with a contemptuous backhand, the sound of Dupree's wrist snapping echoing through the room. Before the collector could even scream, Raiden's claws, each the size of a dagger, plunged into his chest. He lifted Dupree off the floor, holding him close. As the life drained from him, Dupree's eyes found Cassidy's. His strength was failing, but he used his last ounce of will to reach out, his bloody hand clamping onto her forearm. His voice was a wet, gurgling whisper, meant only for her. "The heart must not be whole. It doesn't store, it consumes." His blood, hot and thick with his own dark magic, seeped into her skin, leaving behind a complex, swirling sigil like a dark tattoo. Then his eyes glazed over and Raiden cast his lifeless body aside. This was our chance. Raiden was distracted, savoring his victory. "The fragment, now!" I roared. While Raiden bent over Dupree's body, seemingly preparing some dark ritual, I sprinted to the pedestal. I grabbed the mirrored meteorite. It was cold, so cold it burned, and it pulsed in my hand like a living alien heart. "Back door, go, go, go!" We fell back through the chaos, Lucas creating a path with his emitter, Nathan covering our retreat. The battle between the house's spirits and the werewolves raged on, a convenient screen for our escape. We burst through the kitchen, kicked open a service door, and scrambled out into the humid night, leaving the symphony of destruction behind us. As our armored vehicle peeled out onto the street, I risked a look back. The Dupree mansion was now wreathed in flames, and standing on the roof, silhouetted against the fire and the moon, was Raiden. He wasn't pursuing us, he was watching us leave. He held up Dupree's body in one hand in a mock salute. He'd let us take the second fragment. He was still playing his game, and we were moving exactly as he wanted. The paranoia started to set in somewhere in the desolate flatlands of West Texas. We'd found refuge in a derelict motor inn off a forgotten highway, the kind of place where dreams go to die. The sign, the Dusty Spur, had half its neon letters missing. It was anonymous, isolated, and it felt like a cage. We had 2 pieces of the heart, but we were bleeding, exhausted, and running blind. "Twice," I said, pacing the grimy floor of the motel room. The words were quiet, but they landed like hammer blows. Twice he's known exactly where we were. Greenbrier was a ghost town, but he knew Command would send us. He left the breadcrumb to Chicago. In New Orleans, his pack was waiting. This isn't a coincidence. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. I looked at each of them, my team, my family, and for the first time I felt the cold hand of suspicion. I have to ask. I have to clear it. Lucas looked offended, his hands tightening on his tablet. "Ethan, my gear is triple firewalled, quantum encrypted. If there was a tracker on our vehicle or our equipment, I'd know. It's clean. I swear it." Nathan sat on the edge of a sagging bed, sharpening an arrowhead with a whetstone. He didn't look up. "It's not a physical tracker," he said, his voice low and certain. "It's a gaze. I've felt it since we left Chicago, like we're being watched through a one-way mirror. But the eyes aren't made of flesh." All eyes turned to Cass. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor, the 2 fragments of the heart placed before her. The obsidian shard seemed to drink the light, while the mirrored meteorite cast distorted reflections around the room. The bloody sigil on her forearm, a last gift from Dupree, seemed darker, more pronounced. "He's right," she whispered, her eyes closed in concentration. "It's not us he's tracking. It's them." She gestured to the artifacts. "There's a thread, a connection. Something woven into their very existence, and he's following it. But it's not from him. It's one of ours." Her eyes snapped open. "Someone in the agency put an etheric beacon on these things before they were ever assigned to us. A mole. Not just a leak, but a traitor using magic." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. We were being led to the slaughter by our own side. "I can find the source," Cass said, her jaw set. "But I'll need a locus. A mirror. And it's going to be loud, magically speaking. If they're watching, they'll know I'm looking back." "Do it," I said without hesitation. We used the cracked, mildew-spotted mirror from the motel bathroom. Cass placed it on the floor, propped against a chair. She instructed Lucas to set up a field that would dampen the magical backlash, but we all knew it was like using a bucket to stop a tsunami. She sat before the mirror, the moonlight from the window her only illumination. She began to chant, her voice gaining strength, her hands tracing patterns over the reflective surface. The air grew cold, and the mirror's surface began to ripple like water. It was a dangerous ritual, an astral intrusion that could get her killed or drive her insane. Blood began to trickle from her nose, then from the corners of her eyes, tracing stark red lines down her pale face. "I see the thread," she gasped, her voice strained. "It's strong. Leading back to Langley, the Pentagon." Her body seized, and she let out a pained cry. "Cass, that's enough. Cut it off." I started towards her, but Nathan put a hand on my chest, holding me back. "She has to see the face," he said grimly. "Or this was all for nothing." Cass let out a final, shuddering breath. In the rippling surface of the mirror, an image coalesced. It wasn't a smoky den of cultists or some shadowy agent. It was a sterile, secure office. And standing in the middle of it was a man in a decorated uniform, his face familiar and impassive. General Matthews, our handler. For a terrifying second, a shadow behind him seemed to detach from the others, a deeper darkness with 2 points of burning, hungry light. He wasn't just a traitor. He was a worshipper, a high-ranking member of the First Hunger. "He's leading Ryden right to our door!" Lucas yelled, scrambling to check the perimeter sensors. "No!" Cass choked out, wiping the blood from her face with a trembling hand. "I can't break the link, but I can confuse it." Summoning her last reserves of strength, she slammed her palm onto the mirror. It didn't shatter. Instead, the image of Matthews fractured into 1,000 identical pictures. "I'm creating echoes," she panted, slumping against the wall, utterly spent. "Dozens of false signals, scattered from Seattle to Miami. It'll blind him, buy us time, but not for long. Time. That's all we had." I walked over to our secure comms terminal, the direct line to Matthews, to command, to the whole damn compromised system. I looked at the faces of my team. What was left of them? Betrayed. Hunted. Alone. I made the only decision I could. "Silver Crescent Protocol is compromised," I announced, my voice hard as iron. "As of this moment, we are dark. No contact, no backup, no agency. We're on our own." I picked up the heavy terminal. With a roar of fury and frustration, I smashed it against the concrete floor. It shattered into a useless heap of plastic and wires. We were ghosts now, and the only way forward was through the dark. We traded the armored SUV for a beaten-up Ford pickup that screamed anonymity. We were off the grid, running on cash, canned food, and Nathan's intuition. The fragments, wrapped in lead-lined cloth in the back, emitted a low, almost sub-aural hum, a siren song that Nathan claimed was pulling us west, toward the red rock and vast skies of Arizona. He directed us off the interstate and onto a series of dusty, sun-bleached roads that led deep into the Navajo Nation. He was taking us home. His grandmother, he explained, was a medicine woman, a keeper of the old ways, one of the few who still remembered the stories that weren't written in books. She lived in a modest home that seemed to have grown out of the desert landscape itself, surrounded by a garden of hardy, unfamiliar plants. She was ancient, her face a beautiful roadmap of wrinkles, her eyes as dark and knowing as the night sky. She looked at us, at the weariness and violence clinging to us like dust, and simply nodded. "You have brought a storm with you, Shiaji," she said to Nathan, her voice like the rustle of dry leaves. "Grandson." That evening, under a canopy of stars so bright they felt close enough to touch, she told us the legend. She called the artifact Yelk Diwi Beye Hani, the heart of the sleeping sky. It was never meant to be a weapon, she explained. It wasn't a tool to create eternal night. It was a key to a prison. Long before the first people, she said, her gaze fixed on the flickering campfire, there were other things. Hungers that gnawed at the roots of the world. The greatest of these was the Star Eater, a being of absolute void, sentenced by the holy people to be caged beyond the veil of the sky. The heart is the lock on its cell. If the three pieces are brought together under a wounded sun, the lock will break. Raiden's goal wasn't to rule the world in darkness. It was to end it, to unleash his ravenous dark god upon creation. "We have two pieces," I said, my voice tight. "Where is the third?" The old shaman looked not at me, but at Cassidy. "The third piece was never a stone," she said softly. "It was deemed too dangerous to exist in physical form. So the holy people gave it a different vessel. It is a spirit guardian, a living ward that binds itself to a bloodline, sleeping until it is needed. It chooses a host who is willing to sacrifice, to give up memory, identity, self, all to maintain the balance." She paused, her dark eyes locking with Cass's. "It has been sleeping in your bloodline for generations, child. Waiting." A wave of dawning horror and understanding washed over us. Cassidy slowly looked down at her arm, at the intricate sigil Dupree's blood had left behind. Her breath hitched. "His last words," she whispered, her voice trembling. He said the heart consumes. His blood, his magic. It wasn't a curse. It was an awakening. A key to unlock the part of me that was already there. She looked up at us, her eyes wide with a terrifying new reality. It's not in me. I am the third fragment. I am the living key. The weight of that revelation settled on us, heavy and suffocating. We weren't just protecting stones anymore. We were protecting one of our own, who was now the most important and most vulnerable person on the planet. The shaman seemed to know our next question before we asked it. She unrolled a worn, hand-drawn map of the region. Raiden will know this now. He will feel the key has been turned. He will go to the place of power where the veil is thinnest. Her gnarled finger tapped a location deep within the painted desert. A circle of black stones. The ancient ones called it the place where the sky bleeds. He will conduct his ritual there during the next eclipse. Lucas checked his tablet, running a satellite calendar. There's a total solar eclipse in 2 days, he said, his voice grim. As we prepared to leave, Nathan shared a quiet farewell with his grandmother. She pressed a quiver of newly fletched arrows into his hands, their obsidian tips gleaming. The spirits of this land are now watching you, grandson, she said, her voice firm. Do not let the shadow swallow the sun. We drove away as the first light of dawn painted the desert in hues of orange and purple. We were no longer hunting. We were racing to the end of the world. The Arizona heat was a physical presence, a blast furnace that shimmered off the asphalt. We arrived at the ritual site a day early. It was a wide, flat mesa in the heart of the painted desert, a place that felt profoundly ancient and desolate. The ground was covered in petroglyphs carved millennia ago, spirals, horned figures, and depictions of star-like beings. In the center of the plateau stood a ring of towering basalt monoliths, black as night and humming with a latent energy that made my teeth ache. This was Raiden's chosen stage. High above, the moon had already begun to take its first tiny bite out of the sun. There was no time to waste. We spent the last hours of daylight turning the sacred ground into a kill zone. Lucas, looking more like a soldier than a scientist, planted a perimeter of his custom-made infrasonic mines, designed to disorient and incapacitate werewolves. He set up powerful tripod-mounted UV floodlights, all wired to a central generator. I field-stripped and cleaned my axe, checked every shell for my shotgun, custom-loaded with silver buckshot, and plotted fields of fire. Nathan, silent and focused, moved along the edge of the mesa, finding the perfect sniper's nest among a cluster of boulders, a spot that gave him a clear view of the entire circle. We knew we couldn't win a straight fight. The plan was desperate, bordering on suicidal. Nathan and I would be the bait, engaging Raiden and his elite guard, drawing their full attention. Lucas would use his tech to hold back the main wave of cultists that would inevitably follow. This had to create an opening, however small, for Cassidy. She had to get to the altar stone in the center of the circle where Raiden would place the 2 physical fragments. Her goal was to use her own nature as the third fragment to sever the connection between them, to break the key before it could be fully turned. In the eerie twilight of the advancing eclipse, I found Cass standing near the edge of the circle. She looked ethereal, almost translucent, her eyes unfocused as if she were looking at something far beyond the horizon. The brand on her arm glowed with a soft, internal light. "How much do you remember, Cass?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. She took a moment to answer, as if retrieving the information from a great distance. "Fragments," she said, her voice a faint echo. I remember the sting of silver dust on my skin, my mother's smile, the shape of it, but not her name. She looked at me, and for a second, a flicker of the old Cass was there. "I remember your voice, Ethan. It's an anchor." The admission hit me harder than any physical blow. The price she was paying was etched on her face. This was our last moment of peace, a shared breath before the plunge. And then he came. Ryden appeared on the horizon, a black silhouette against the dying sun. He walked alone, with a long, purposeful stride. In each hand he carried a fragment of the heart. The obsidian shard seemed to swallow the light, while the mirrored meteorite glowed with a captive luminescence. Behind him, cresting the hill, came his honor guard. Not dozens of cultists, but a select few. 10-foot-tall behemoths, werewolves so ancient and powerful they walked on 2 legs, their forms a perfect, terrifying fusion of man and beast. They were the Alphas, his chosen elite. Ryden stopped just outside the circle of stones. His voice rolled across the plateau, less a sound and more a vibration in my bones. "Give me the key, child." It was not a request.
"Surrender the living fragment, and I will grant your world a swift and merciful end. Resist, and you will watch it drown in an eternity of hunger."
I stepped forward, raising my axe. "Our orders are to stop you, Ryden." A low, rumbling chuckle came from his massive chest. A predatory grin split his lupine face. "You had orders." He raised the 2 fragments high. As if on command, the moon slid fully into place. The world plunged into an unnatural darkness. A corona of blood-red fire burned around the black disk of the moon. The eclipse was total. The ritual had begun. The Alphas attacked with the ferocity of a storm surge. They weren't the frenzied Omegas or the pack from New Orleans. They were warriors, moving with terrifying speed and coordination. They fanned out, their movements a blur, deliberately avoiding the patterns where Lucas had laid his mines. They knew. I met the first one head-on. It was a gray-furred giant with claws like scythes. It swiped at me, and I ducked under the blow, the wind of its passage tearing at my jacket. I brought my axe around in a low arc, aiming for its knee. The blade bit deep, eliciting a roar of pain and fury. It wasn't a killing blow, but it slowed the beast down. Before it could recover, a black-fletched arrow sprouted from its throat. It gurgled, clawed at its neck, and collapsed. 1 down. Lucas's perimeter erupted in a wall of sound and light as the main body of cultists charged over the ridge. His automated turrets, firing silver-laced rounds, chattered to life. The sonic cannons pulsed, sending out waves of disorienting noise that made the cultists stumble and fall. But there were too many. They were a tide of bodies, and his defenses were starting to buckle under the sheer weight of their numbers. My focus was on Ryden. Empowered by the eclipse and the 2 fragments he held, he seemed to have transcended physical limitations. He moved through the battle like a phantom, a blur of black fur and burning eyes. I fired my shotgun point blank into his chest. The silver buckshot, which would have torn a normal werewolf apart, merely bounced off his hide with metallic pings. He didn't even flinch. With a contemptuous backhand, he sent me flying. I landed hard, pain exploding in my chest as several ribs cracked. The air was driven from my lungs, and the world swam in a haze of agony. Through it all, Cassidy ran. She was a ghost of a girl in a whirlwind of monsters, sprinting for the central altar stone. Ryden saw her. His game was over. With a guttural roar that shook the very stones, he abandoned his fight with me and charged after her, covering the ground with impossible speed. "Ethan! You can't stop him! Help her!" Nathan's voice cut through my pain-fogged mind. He was right. I couldn't beat Raiden in a direct confrontation, but I could buy her a chance. Staggering to my feet, ignoring the fire in my side, I saw what Nathan was planning. He wasn't aiming at Raiden. His last, most powerful arrow was nocked, the meteoric iron tip glowing faintly. He was aiming at one of the massive basalt monoliths that formed the circle, a key nexus point for the ritual's energy. It was a suicidal move. To disrupt the circle was to invite the full, untamed power of the ritual back upon himself. Our eyes met across the battlefield for a fraction of a second. A silent understanding. A goodbye. Nathan loosed the arrow. It flew true, a black streak against the crimson sky. It struck the monolith with a sound like a thunderclap. A spider web of cracks erupted across the ancient stone, and a wave of raw, untamed energy blasted outwards. The wave hit Raiden, and the alpha werewolf screamed, his body momentarily paralyzed, locked in place by the chaotic magical feedback. But the backlash was instantaneous. A bolt of pure, white energy leaped from the fractured stone directly to Nathan's position. He didn't even have time to cry out. He was simply gone, incinerated, leaving nothing behind but his bow clattering to the scorched earth. His sacrifice bought a single precious moment. In that frozen instant, Cassidy reached the altar. Raiden, roaring with a fury that was now mixed with pain, shook off the paralysis and lunged for her. Lucas's perimeter had fallen. I was too far away, too broken. She was alone. She had one heartbeat to save the world. Raiden's massive clawed hand closed around Cassidy, lifting her as if she were a doll. He didn't kill her. He hurled her onto the flat surface of the central altar stone. With a triumphant snarl, he brought the two physical fragments down, placing one on either side of her head. For the first time in millennia, the three pieces of the heart of the sleeping sky were united. A shockwave of pure power erupted from the altar. The ground bucked. The remaining monoliths hummed with a terrifying resonance. Cassidy screamed, her body arching in agony. But the scream changed. It lost its note of pain and deepened into a sound of raw, cosmic power. Her eyes, which had been clouded with fading memories, now blazed with the light of captured nebulae. Pure, stellar energy poured from her, a blinding white light that pushed back the bloody gloom of the eclipse. She saw it all. I could feel it, an echo of the knowledge pouring into her. The creation of the heart, the war against the Star Eater, the long chain of her ancestors who had served as sleeping guardians. She wasn't just the key. She was the lock, the warden, and the prison itself, all in one. She looked at Raiden, who stared in shock and horror at the power he had unleashed but could not control. Her voice was not her own. It was a chorus of 1,000 generations, a symphony of starlight and sacrifice that echoed across the mesa without sound. "You wish to open the prison, Raiden?" They said, "I will become the prison." Instead of severing the link between the artifacts, she did the opposite. She pulled. She drew all of their ancient, terrible power into herself. It was a ritual of unmaking. She wasn't just destroying the heart. She was using its power to erase herself, to collapse the lock and key into a singularity of self-sacrifice, forever sealing the gate. Her physical form began to dissolve, her skin and clothes flaking away into motes of pure light. She was sacrificing her identity, her memory, her very soul to fuel the final ward. For one last, eternal second before the oblivion took her, her blazing eyes found mine across the battlefield. The cosmic chorus fell silent. The starlight softened. And in their depths, I saw Cassidy. Just Cass, A flicker of recognition. A flash of warmth, of sorrow, of farewell. She remembered my name. Then came the explosion. It made no sound. It was a silent, expanding sphere of astral light, a wave of pure reality-bending energy. It washed over Ryden and the ancient werewolf, the patient zero of a world-ending plague, simply ceased to exist, unwritten from the pages of history. The wave expanded, passing through his alphas, the cultists, and they too vanished into nothingness. The light washed over me, and for a moment I felt not heat but a profound emptiness, the feeling of a story ending mid-sentence. When the light faded, the altar was empty. Cassidy was gone. The obsidian shard and the mirrored meteorite had crumbled into fine gray dust that scattered on the wind. The eclipse ended abruptly, the sun reappearing not as a life-giving orb, but as a wounded, bloodshot eye in a bruised violet sky. The world was quiet. The battle was over. Silence descended upon the painted desert. A profound, aching silence filled only by the wind whistling over the cracked monoliths. Lucas, his face covered in grime and a nasty gash over his eye, limped over to me. We stood together in the ruins of our victory, two survivors on a battlefield of ghosts. We'd won, but it felt like we'd lost everything. I looked up. The sky was wrong. The sun was back, but the bloody corona from the eclipse hadn't faded. It remained, a permanent angry scar burned across the heavens, a testament to the violence that had been done to the fabric of reality. Lucas's tablet, its screen cracked, suddenly chimed with a dozen alerts. He stared at it, his face paling. "Ethan," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Look at this." He showed me the screen. A map of the United States was lit up like a Christmas tree from hell. Dozens, hundreds of anomalous energy signatures were flaring up, from coast to coast. They were smaller than what the heart had produced, but they were everywhere. Cassidy's final act hadn't just sealed the prison. The blast, the sheer force of it, had been like a metaphysical earthquake, sending cracks through the thin veil between our world and others. "The echo of the blood moon," Lucas murmured, reading a preliminary analysis from one of the few functioning government sensors. The blast wave propagated across the continent. It woke things up. He didn't need to elaborate. I understood. Ancient things. Things that had been sleeping, hibernating, waiting. The old terrors of this land, the nightmares that had given birth to folklore. In the deep woods of Montana, the Wendigo, spirits of winter and cannibalism, began to stir from their century-long slumber. In the bayous of Louisiana, the ancient swamp-born faux follet opened their glowing eyes. Across the sun-scorched deserts of the Southwest, the skinwalkers, the shape-shifting horrors of Navajo legend, felt the wards that had bound them crumble to dust. Every local legend, every campfire story, every creature that parents used to scare their children, they were all becoming real. The locks were broken. The age of myth was over. The age of monsters had begun. My mission wasn't over. It had just changed. Radically. I walked over to the spot where Nathan had made his last stand and picked up his bow. The wood was still warm. I looked at Lucas, my last remaining soldier, the last member of Silver Crescent. We were no longer government agents following orders. We were all that was left. 2 men against an entire nation of awakening nightmares. We were the last guardians on the border of a world that was tearing itself apart. We climbed into our battered pickup truck, the silence between us heavier than any words. There was no destination, no new orders, no home to return to. There was only the road ahead, and a war that was now infinitely bigger than we could ever have imagined. As we drove away from the scarred plateau, leaving the ghosts of our friends behind, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The red scar still burned in the sky, a wound that would never heal. Our world was haunted now. The hunger was just beginning.